This is the thing about Russia. They sense strength, they also sense weakness. And when they sense weakness, the forces within Russia can move very quickly. And if they feel that he can't win this war, that there is no success, I think, and Zelensky and certainly the Ukrainians realize this, that things could change very dramatically in Moscow.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had Hale Kempfer on the show. He's a former US Marine intelligence officer and national security expert. He's spoken to us about this phone conversation between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and whether this 30-day ceasefire or lack thereof is a success. He says the White House is spinning this as a success, but who really knows if it actually is? We've spoken to him about those comments from Boris Johnson saying that Putin is laughing at us, so we get into that, as well as what is Ukraine giving up? What would the situation be for Ukraine if they gave into Russia, if Trump kind of forced Ukraine to give up what Russia is asking them for? So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube. Former US Marine intelligence officer and a national security expert, Hale Kempfer, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you, Maddie.
It's good to get your expertise after another busy day when it comes to Trump land and his interactions with Vladimir Putin. We had this near 2-hour phone conversation last night between the two leaders. It's their second interaction since Donald Trump's administration began. The consensus from the meeting was that Vladimir Putin has not signed on to a full 30-day ceasefire. He has, however, signed on to a halt in energy and infrastructure targets. Basically, neither party can attack each other's energy infrastructure targets. So would you consider this a successful negotiation, Hal?
Maddie, it's interesting. The White House, of course, is selling this as a very successful win, if you will. You know, finally that the U.S. president's talked to, you know, his counterpart in Russia, and so far as even Tulsi Gabbard said that, you know, Putin and Trump are old friends and have a great rapport. So it's being sold as a very positive thing. The reality is he went in there with a 30-day ceasefire proposal that was flat out rejected. All right, didn't go anywhere. What came out of it, and it sounds like this was kind of pre-negotiated, was a thing on energy infrastructure. And so it sounded as though there had been an agreement. And actually, President Zelensky in Ukraine had publicly said, yes, I will accept a 30-day ceasefire on energy infrastructure strikes. So it sounded like there was some sort of partial victory. With that said, there was a massive drone and missile strike by Russia last night on Ukraine, and it appears to have, of course, hit energy infrastructure. So whatever agreement was there, certainly in practice, is not being abided by. But there's also a little bit of a difference in terms. Energy infrastructure or energy and infrastructure. That's come out two different ways. There's a White House thing that came out and said energy and infrastructure. It's not an insignificant thing. If you're saying energy and if you say energy infrastructure, you're talking about the infrastructure tied to energy. Energy and infrastructure, you're talking about anything you could construe as energy, which could be a truck full of fuel driving down the road, or anything else, or a gas station for that matter. And infrastructure, well, you have to define what infrastructure is. So if they see Russians, for example, crossing a bridge to attack them, can they hit that bridge? Well, if they say that bridge was infrastructure, technically, that would be falling into that category of infrastructure. So what it sounds like, whatever was decided upon had a little bit of ambiguity in the language. Maybe that'll get settled out or something. But frankly, from a Ukrainian standpoint, if it's energy and infrastructure, President Zelensky has to look at that very closely. And as it stands right now, both sides, Ukraine and Russia, are saying that whatever was agreed to yesterday has been violated. So, and I have a feeling that's what the intent of Putin was to set up some sort of pretext for a violation.
I mean, Hal, it was it would be stupid to trust Putin in this situation that he would follow through with this ceasefire. But as you mentioned, both Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of breaking this agreement overnight. Dmitry Peskov, he said that Ukraine didn't respect the pause and they tried to hit Russia's energy infrastructure, while Zelensky said Putin ordered 150 drone strikes targeting energy infrastructure, transport, and 2 hospitals. So he said, in other words, Putin's words are very much at odds with reality. So what was your response to this? Was it expected that Putin wouldn't, I mean, both of them apparently didn't adhere to the rules, but was it expected?
I think look, if Peskov is saying something, I'm first inclined to believe the exact opposite of whatever he's saying. That's just Peskov, all right? And actually, when you were talking about trust Putin, you could have stopped right there. I don't know that you can ever really trust Putin per se, but I think Ukraine was trying to abide by this. Ukraine has a lot of reasons to, if you look at motivation, Ukraine has a lot of reasons to try and abide by some sort of ceasefire on energy infrastructure. They want to keep that U.S. aid coming in. They want to keep the U.S. intelligence sharing on track. So they have a lot of reasons to do it. The Russians simply disregard it. I think what's happening right now is Putin is testing President Trump. You know, he's basically saying, yeah. Now, first off, I should say one thing. Putin consistently has said, we agree to a ceasefire in principle. And when you travel around the world, and I know you're from the Pacific region, if you're negotiating with Japanese and they say, we will try, that's another way of them saying, it's probably not going to happen. All right. If you're in the Middle East and you ask them to do something and they say inshallah, it sounds great, but the reality is it's a very polite way of saying it's probably not going to come about. All right. And when the Russians agree in principle, that's pretty much what they're saying is they don't agree with you, but they don't want to come out right out and say they disagree with you, so they're not agreeing to it. And right now the challenge is Russia has a tactical innovation on the battlefield that they just used to success in Kursk, which is these fiber optic controlled first-person view drones. They've been using that. They pushed back the Ukrainians after months of the Ukrainians holding the lines. The Ukrainians had to withdraw their forces and pull south. So right now he's kind of feeling the wind in his sails. He's marketing that, if you will, if I could use that language, to talk about how successful he is and everything. And frankly, he does kind of live in his own sort of bubble, if you will, in terms of what he believes. He doesn't, there's not a lot of outside inputs, despite the fact he's a former intelligence officer. He kind of believes his own propaganda sometimes. So,
but Hal, is Putin stringing Trump along right now because he's giving him an inch. He says that he wants peace. He says he will think about a ceasefire. He says he'll think about negotiation. He says he will do whatever, and then he'll enter these conversations with Steve Witkoff. He'll enter a conversation with Putin. He'll take something back. He'll ask him to get Ukraine to concede something, won't offer up any concessions of his own. But at this stage, we're 2 months into this administration. Obviously, Donald Trump optimistically thought he would get this done in 24 hours. No analyst, anyone in intelligence, no expert believed that would happen. But 2 months later, it honestly feels like Putin is stringing Donald Trump along.
I think you're absolutely right. I think he is kind of stringing him along. In all fairness, Donald Trump and the Trump administration, they're in a difficult situation politically because he did campaign on ending this war. And part of it, if I could step back a little bit, as frustrating as it is to me, because I really, I would like to see, the Ukrainians come away with something that is really meaningful, that's lasting, that could really, ensure the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Ukraine and avoid a future war. With all of that said, I don't know that Putin is ready to end the war, and there's another reason why. Here's what Putin's got a lot of internal problems with Russia. His economy is tanking big time. He's got literally, with the exception of oil, he's got no global trade. He's got nothing going on. He has switched his economy to this wartime economy. So it makes it kind of look like there's growth, but it's a wartime economy where he's basically spending everything to include all their gold reserves and everything to keep this going. If the war was to actually stop, if the war was to end and the troops came home and they quit buying weapons at this prodigious rate, all of a sudden you'd have a lot of soldiers and defense workers on the streets unemployed, and an economy that could not employ them. And he's a student of history. He does know that that is a very dangerous situation. He's got so many other problems there that could literally be that proverbial straw, if you will, that breaks the camel's back of the regime, and that people will be discontented. If he can't support the Russian economy, can't support the Russian population, that'll happen. And he's also disproportionately pulled troops and of course incurred casualties in minority areas, places away from Moscow and St. Petersburg. So he's already frayed the fringe of whatever the Russian Empire is, if you will. So he's got a big problem there. It's like he wants to end it, but does he really want to end it?
Well, he's kind of doomed either way, Hal, because if he keeps the war going, he spends his entire GDP pretty much on funding this war, and if he doesn't, he obviously has a bit of a crisis when it comes to jobs, employment, as you mentioned. It's a really interesting point. I haven't had anyone bring that up. I've, of course, had a number of experts say to me that he must continue the war in order to stay in power, but that specific point about employment is really interesting. But I thought this was an interesting tweet from former Prime Minister Boris Johnson here in the UK. He tweeted that Putin wants to keep bombing, he wants to keep killing innocent Ukrainians, he wants Ukraine disarmed, he wants Ukraine neutralized. He isn't negotiating, he's laughing at us. When you hear that term, he's laughing at us, do you think that is actually true? Because a lot of people would think that Donald Trump is kind of, he is good at making a deal, he is good at interacting with people from different sides, different businesses. He spent his life basically holding high stake meetings. Do you think Donald Trump knows that Putin could be laughing at him?
I think inside, it's within the Oval Office, in the White House, they're probably looking at this saying, okay, we're not getting what we want. And they're trying to, as a White House, look, this is not the first White House that's spun stuff, so to speak, all right? They're trying to spin this as a success. They're trying to say, hey, look, this is a very good phone call. We've made some headway and stuff. But the reality is he's realizing this is not going to happen real fast. Whatever he thought his relationship with Putin is, obviously he hit a wall, essentially. Putin wouldn't say anything. And you could really tell on the back end, it wasn't just the 30-day, energy infrastructure discussion. It was all the other stuff, which was, Ukraine disarmed, Ukraine doesn't mobilize its troops. It's all these ridiculous things that there's no way that can ever be acceptable for a separate sovereign Ukraine for that to happen. So in that regard, it does, obviously it's a huge setback. But I will say this, Boris Johnson has always, had a good relationship with Trump. Many would say politically, Boris Johnson kind of, and Trump sort of kind of worked each other, so to speak, because, with the MAGA movement in the U.S. and with the Brexit side of Boris Johnson's ascent to the prime ministership, way back when, that there was a lot of similarities there. And they've always had a good relationship. So for Boris Johnson to come out and use that term laughing, I was really kind of almost taken aback. I go, wow, that's a pretty strong message to Donald Trump from someone he's always seen as something of truly a political ally. Although I will say this, Boris Johnson has always been very pro-Ukraine in a way that Donald Trump has not expressed that same sentiment.
Which you can understand, because I feel like Donald Trump's entire rhetoric when it came to the 2024 presidential election was revoking spending so much foreign aid on Ukraine because it was a testy subject when it came to his constituents. And it's obviously not as testy here in the UK. But I want to talk about the likelihood of a peace deal, Hal, because as you kind of narrated for us, Russia hasn't had any concessions on the line. Right now, we don't know what Russia would be giving up, but we know what Russia wants Ukraine to give up. We know that they want them officially not to even be considered for a NATO membership. They want all aid and intelligence from the United States revoked. They want basically troops to not be in Ukraine, and potentially they want that 20% of Ukrainian land that they now occupy to officially be Russian territory. So this is a large amount of stuff that Ukraine might give up. My worry is that Donald Trump will get so frustrated with his back and forth negotiation, if you will, that he will say to Zelensky, you need to sign on to this. This is the best deal that you're ever going to get. And Ukraine will kind of be left in the trenches, living in a country where 20% of their land has now gone, living in a country where they have no security from the United States, and just kind of left to their own devices. Is that a situation that you could see unfolding?
That's a big concern, is that that Donald Trump would get so caught up in, we got to make a deal, we got to do something, that he would allow that to happen. Of course, everything you just talked about there, the problem is it leaves the Russian forces poised to literally roll into Zaporizhia, Kherson, Kharkiv. They're literally, 30, 40 miles away from some major cities there. It leaves Ukraine wide open. In fact, what Putin's position is, Ukraine, you basically just stand down, disarm, pull your troops away, and we will build up our forces, and in exchange for this short pause in peace, we will then probably turn around and pursue exactly what we were doing before, and the world won't stop us. That's pretty much Putin's position. Of course, Ukraine knows that. I would add on to that, by the way, this morning, Putin had also added on, we're thinking we maybe need to take Odessa as well. So when you talk about that country that would be left over, minus the 20%, it'd actually be less than that 80%. It would also take out their major seaport. So you'd have a country that was largely landlocked, in addition to being cut off in all these other ways. It's just really not a very tenable situation. I think, though, if I may say just one thing, this war has gone back and forth in terms of tactical innovation. Drones have changed this war. Drones have changed everything, the way we see warfare, based on what we've seen in Ukraine. I think this temporary innovation of using these fiber optic FPV drones that they used to success in Kursk, that will end. I can already think of several ways that they could, there's little tactical innovations you do on the battlefield where all of a sudden the enemy's advantage turns into nothing. And I think that Ukraine is going to figure out a way to mitigate that threat. And when that happens, the lines will kind of freeze for a while. I also think this is kind of Ukraine's strategy and the other side. They have been developing their own capabilities, very long-range drones, long-range cruise missile. They modified the Neptune cruise missile to shoot 600 kilometers now. That opens up a variety of targets deep within Russia. They finally have the means to bring this war home to the Russian people in a way that they have not done before. And if they can do that, Zelensky certainly, and everybody around him understands, there's a political dimension away from the battlefield. If people in Russia feel that Putin does not have a handle on this war, that this war is causing too much harm to them directly, that could be a very destabilizing element that could shift everything. And I certainly remember very dramatically the events from 1989 to 1991. We went into, 88, Russia was, the Soviet Union was this big, powerful, monolithic, albeit economically sick empire. In 89, it just started crumbling really fast. And then in 91, the Soviet Union just literally disappeared faster than anybody could have predicted. There are certain dynamics within Russia that when change happens, it happens really fast. And that's the nature of it.
Hal, sorry to interrupt, are you saying that there is a chance that Putin's failure in this war could lead to him losing his spot on the top, losing his presidency, and seeing his people turn on him?
Absolutely. If he loses this war, if people see that he's losing this war, or if he loses this war, I think that could be incredibly destabilizing in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Those are the two big cities. And if people, this is the thing about Russia. They sense strength. They also sense weakness. And when they sense weakness, the forces within Russia can move very quickly. And if they feel that he can't win this war, that there is no success, I think, and Zelensky and certainly the Ukrainians realize this, that things could change very dramatically in Moscow. And
well, on that note, Hal, because Putin hasn't really been able to leave his own country other than going to Saudi because of fear that he will be assassinated by people who hate him, people who want to even throw him in prison for his war crimes. Do you think there is still a threat if this war continues to go downhill for Russia? It feels to the Russian people that he is losing, that he will be a sitting duck within Russia for an assassination attempt potentially.
I think he's always, there was this goes back earlier in the war. There appears there was a very almost successful assassination attempt in Moscow. Reports were that it was a vehicular ambush, and that his vehicle just got out of there very quickly. And right after that, it changed everything. The way he operated, where he went, how he went, everything like that. He went to Saudi Arabia, but also Mongolia was the other one, and he really doesn't, where he goes is he goes in, someplace very safe, and he's very careful. If you attack the Kremlin, there's a very good chance that Putin won't be in the Kremlin because he stays away from there because it's such a prominent target. So, his personal safety is an issue, but he also has to look around him. One of the things he's been doing is taking around anybody he perceives as a threat. There's been a number of people that were close to him that had a problem when they get into high floors of buildings of falling out windows. That's an indication of a purging system, very kind of endemic to the old Soviet system, where they purge those that are perceived as a threat. He's been doing that for quite some time. He knows that it looks with a dictator, everything looks, as they say, with a dictator, they have absolute control of everything up until about the last 30 minutes. And then the last 30 minutes, everything changes. And that's kind of Putin. And that's what everyone realizes is at some point when it does happen, it will happen very fast. The question is, can the conditions be put in place where something like that would happen? And we've seen it over and over again. I mean, he saw what happened to Saddam Hussein. He certainly saw what happened to Gaddafi. He saw what happened to Ceausescu in Romania. And he knows that he went to do something. He wanted to do it very quickly. Take Ukraine. This war did not go the way he had planned. This war has not gone the way he had planned. And so right now, I think he thinks, well, I'm going to try and work President Trump to see if I can get as many concessions as I can, and then maybe come up with a new plan to take Ukraine in the future. We'll see.
Well, we'll be waiting and watching for that. Hale Kempfer, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you, Maddie.